Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today. Coming to paperback and e-readers this April, Isis, the main event. It's carnage inside of a steel cage as the goddess next door steps in the squared circle against the beast from the bowels of this all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, the main event, this April. You often hear many of these conspiracy theorists out here talking about the whole idea of a new world order. And according to these conspiracy theorists, the wealthy, who they believe are the ruling class, are conspiring to overthrow all of the governments of the world and establish this new world order. Now, when I take a critical examination of this whole conspiracy theory regarding the new world order, I see it falling completely apart. And the reason why I see this conspiracy theory of the New World Order falling completely apart is because when I take a critical examination of the ideas behind this whole New World Order conspiracy theory, I see a lot of similarities between your medieval feudalism and the slave plantations of the antebellum South. And both of those economic models fell completely apart for the exact same reason a new world order would fall completely apart. Now, according to these conspiracy theorists, they believe that this new world order being ushered in by the rich is supposed to be where they go out here and destroy all of these world economies and create this new economy where everybody is under one set of elite rulers. However, when I take a critical examination again of that whole theory, it reminds me a lot of feudalism, and it reminds me a lot of the slave plantation. More, it sounds like feudalism because during the feudal periods of medieval times, you had all of the resources of a community run by this wealthy feudal lord. And in this feudal system, you had a tiered class where the feudal lord would be at the top, it would be the ruling class. You would have a series of nobles who would be the people who were the managers of the economic system. And then you would have the knights, who would be the protector class, who would be the people who would go out here and protect the castle and its resources from those who were outside it, or the bandits who would try to steal the resources. And at the lowest level, you would have the serfs, who were these people who were bound to the land and had to go out here and do the tasks like the farming, and do the tasks like the laboring, and the tasks like the building. And you also have the artisans as well. These were the blacksmiths, the painters, the writers, the composers. And again, the serfs were at the bottom, and again, they were the ones who did the farming and these other tasks, and they were bound to the land, and they had no value. But the big problem with feudalism, even though you had all of these different classes, was that the feudal lord was the one who owned all of the resources. And the wealthy, if they were to destroy all of these governments to take over and create their new world order, they would run into the same problem that the feudal lords ran into during medieval times. And the big problem that the feudal lords ran into was they owned everything. And because they owned everything, they were responsible for everything. Every part of that castle was owned by that feudal lord, and he had to take responsibility for everything as related to the management and supervision overall of that castle, even though the nobles were there and even though the artisans were there and these other people were there. He ultimately, at the end of the day, was the one who was ultimately responsible for building and maintaining that feudal system inside of that castle and taking care of all of those people. And he also had to protect those people from other competing feudal lords who were looking to take his resources and add them to their own. And that's what's happened within this medieval system. You had a lot of wars going on because one feudal lord had more resources than another, and he had to go out here and make sure that he had a sufficient army of knights to protect him, and he also had to make sure that he had resources inside to protect them from any sort of threat on the outside, because these people would hold these guys in these castles for months in these feudal wars. But a lot of people, they're not really thinking about that as related to the New World Order, because they're thinking, oh, it's just going to be all these rich people at the top, and they're going to be able to go out here and rule over everyone. But when you rule over everyone, you have to take responsibility over everyone. And that's what really led to the complete collapse of the feudal system. Was many of these feudal lords wound up becoming overwhelmed by trying to take responsibility for all of the citizens in that society, from the nobles to the artisan class to the serfs. They just could not handle taking care of all of those people. And eventually, many of these feudal castles went into deep debt because many of these feudal lords were going out here extending themselves on credit to maintain their castles and go out here and spend money on things like elaborate thrones, elaborate jewelry, and commissioning lots of paintings. And all of those resources that they spent on those items, those were dollars being taken out of their economic system. And that economic system oftentimes was overtaxed and overwhelmed because you had, again, these very fixed costs as related to your labor, and you had very fixed costs as related to pacifying those who were maintaining your system, like the nobles, like the artisan class, and like your knights. And because you had all of these fixed costs, and these fixed costs went up over time, oftentimes your feudal lord, this is how he wound up becoming completely overwhelmed economically, and this is why the whole feudal system completely collapsed. And your New World Order conspiracy theorists also don't look at the plantation system that happened here in America during the 17th and 18th and 19th century. If you look at those systems, you'll see a similar economic system to what they propose in their New World Order, and that economic system too also fell completely apart. Now, these people who saw the feudalism system fall completely apart due to the overall becoming overwhelmed, what happened with that was they thought, if we don't pay the labor, eventually we'll be able to profit. And yes, that economic system did allow your America and many other parts of the world, with these colonists to get rich, these elites to get rich for a short term, but in the long term, eventually the same thing that collapsed the feudal system collapsed the plantation system. Because what happened with the plantation system to lead to its eventual decline was the fact that slave labor was starting to become extremely expensive. Moreover, these countries which the United States was trading with, they eventually found access to other places to go get their resources from that they wanted to trade from. The British found the Indians in India to go trade with. They managed to conquer parts of Africa and parts of Asia, so they no longer needed to trade with the United States. Moreover, you had this slave labor from Africa, which was becoming more and more expensive because you had to export to bring these slaves over, and all of those costs were starting to overwhelm many of these plantation owners who were thinking, oh, we are making all of this money, but eventually those costs wound up eating up many of these plantation owners' resources. And even before the Civil War, many of these plantation owners were deep in debt and were practically becoming overwhelmed because they had to take care of not only themselves and their families, but they also had to take care of their servants, they had to take care of these overseers, and they also had to take care of all of those slaves. So, like the feudal lord that came before them, they wound up having a whole host of fixed costs, and all of those fixed costs eventually wound up overwhelming all of those plantation owners. And as they saw their way of life practically dwindling and dying on the vine, they were looking for a way to try to preserve it with the Civil War. Unfortunately, they could not preserve that way of life even after the Civil War because the United States was no longer being profitable with an agribusiness model. There was no way to import American cotton and American grains and other products to countries like Britain and France and Germany and those European countries that where they made their most of their money from. Most of those countries were now building their own places to make their own cotton in India and many of these other Asian countries and many of these African countries. So they no longer needed any more things from America. And if you look at the whole concept of a New World Order and you look at it from the historical perspective of feudalism and you look at it from the perspective of the plantation system, the New World Order would fall apart even faster than both your feudalism and your plantation slavery system, because the New World Order is supposed to be about all of these countries being put under one set of rulers. And this one set of rich elite rulers, these billionaires and millionaires, they are supposed to be the ones being this ruling class. Unfortunately, the whole concept of a New World Order would fall completely apart because when you have a one world system, you don't have any trade partners. And if you don't have any way to trade resources, you have no way to go out here and generate wealth. So many of these so-called wealthy ruling class individuals, they would wind up going broke eventually because, one, they would have everybody in the world under their one system, and two, as they had everybody under their one world system, they would have to be able to take care of 7 billion people. And to be responsible for over 7 billion people would be overwhelming for a handful of rich elites. They would practically be overwhelmed by having to take responsibility for all of those individuals across the globe. Moreover, they would have to try to police all of these people, and that is virtually impossible when you think about it critically. It's just completely impossible to get enough people to go out here and be able to police and manage so many people and be able to squash all of those people's ability to dissent against you. So most of the money that these people would have would practically be eaten up in less than a year, and they would be practically broke in less than 5 if I look at it, because they would be so busy trying to police the thinking of people, trying to police the way people behave. They would have no time to go out here and participate in things like trade and commerce, because there would be no trade and commerce. And without trade and commerce to create supply and demand and create the economic system for you to allocate resources, there's no way for anyone to become wealthy under a one world system, and the people who were wealthy would go broke trying to supervise and police so many people, and they would practically go have a nervous breakdown trying to control all of those people in that little bit of time, because this is just not feasible when you really think about it critically. When you think about the whole idea of everybody following under a one world system, again, the economics is just not there, and many of your wealthy people wouldn't be wealthy for long, because like the feudal lords and the plantation owners who came before them, they would wind up just so caught up with all of these fixed costs that they would wind up losing everything that they made individually. Because in order to be able to control large masses of people, this is a fixed cost. And the fixed cost oftentimes, again, is so expensive of trying to control large masses of people that it just isn't worth it. So any smart, wealthy person would sit there and say, I would rather just let these governments go out here and deal with the masses, because if I have to deal with the masses, I have to take responsibility for those masses, and it's a lot cheaper for me to let the government take responsibility for the masses, and even cheaper for me to let the people take responsibility for themselves. Because if I have to go out here like the feudal lord and the plantation owner, I'm going to wind up trying to go broke trying to maintain all of these costs, and I'm not going to be able to wield much power, because I have to be so responsible for so many things that I have no ability to set goals for what I want to do in life, or a long-term vision for what I want to do. Everything is so caught up in the day-to-day that I wind up not being able to set any sort of goals for a long-term future. And this is something many of the conspiracy theorists aren't really thinking about when they think about this whole New World Order idea that they have proposed. Anybody who comes up with the idea of a New World Order would wind up in a world of a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, because there's no way you can control human nature. There's no way you can control human behavior. And eventually, what would happen is these same people who you were trying to control, you would lose control over, the same way the feudal lords lost control over the people, because those people were looking to gain opportunities to enrich themselves. Because your idea of a theory of a ruling class and they're going to rule over people, this whole idea falls completely apart when you think about it, because just like the guys at the top think they're going to be on top forever, that's just not going to be possible, because people live, they die, and even more so, people get replaced, because somebody's always looking to move up and somebody's always looking to move ahead. And in the feudal system, a lot of the nobles and the knight class that were protecting these feudal systems, they were looking to move up. And as they were looking to move up, they were looking to backstab many in the ruling class so that they could take that power for themselves. So the New World Order, again, would fall apart in less than a year or even 5 years, because many of the people at the top, they would think they were going to go on forever, but not understanding that the people they would have to put in place to supervise those masses, they are going to want their power, they're going to want their wealth, they're going to want their resources, and they are willing to take that power, take that wealth, and take those resources. And because those people want to take those things, they're going to want to take out the rulers of this New World Order, and they would put an end to that world sooner rather than later, because human nature is, when it's out there and it's completely filled from a sin nature perspective, it's all about greed, it's all about advancing yourself. And many of those who are younger, they're thinking this old man with all of this money is easy to take, and they're going to try to take everything he's got, because they're going to say, okay, you've got this order, but I'm going to get paid if I go out here and overthrow you and create this chaos. So that whole theory of the New World Order, it falls completely apart when you really think about it, because the whole idea of a handful of people being responsible for a world where there is no trade, where there is no commerce, and there is no way to become wealthy, that's a world that's going to get poor very fast, and it's a world where these leaders are going to wind up in over their heads sooner rather than later, and they're going to be thinking, hey, we made this world order, but this world is soon devolving into complete chaos, and it's a chaos we just can't control. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.